Welcome back to The Late Show, live from Washington, D.C. with me, Bev Turner. Now, let's turn to the developing situation in Iran. The UK and the US have withdrawn military personnel from a base in Qatar after President Trump warned that he will take very strong action if prosecutors are executed.
We've been told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped, and it's stopping. And there's no plan for executions or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset, including you will be very upset. But that's just gotten to me, some information that the killing has stopped, that the executions have stopped. They're not going to have an execution.
That was the president talking today. Meanwhile, the death toll of protesters is reported to have crossed 2,500. And breaking within the past few hours, Iran has closed its airspace, only allowing international flights with Iranian permission to enter or to depart. Let's get the take of research analyst at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies, Janatan Sayeh. Hi, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. Just give your assessment of the situation as we sit here on a Wednesday evening in the start of January. How dangerous is this looking?
So the protests have never been in this scale. This is really the largest protest movement we've seen in the Islamic Republic, which was truly an opportunity for Washington to be able to support this movement given that the regime is at its weakest. The question is whether it's going to be a kinetic engagement, and if so, how far the administration is going to take this. They oftentimes have two options in mind, whether it's just going to be military or it's going to be supplemented with an attack on the repression apparatus. You're talking about bases that are cracking down on protesters, and military-wise, you're talking about the ballistic missile stockpile that the president has really raised alarms about, paired with realistically drone manufacturing facilities as well.
And he talks about the fact that he would take action if the killing didn't stop. From your understanding of the situation, has the killing stopped? There was this high-profile execution that was due to happen. It was a young man who was on the front pages of the British papers yesterday. Do we know his status at the moment?
What realistically happened is that Tehran heard the signs from Washington, and of course they would try to de-escalate. Realistically, they used some backdoor channel to signal to the administration that we will postpone this execution, hoping to deter Washington. But realistically, this is the most repressive regime really in the region. You're talking about the highest number of executions per capita, numerically just second to China. So they're not going to back down just easily. And one thing we've learned from the first Trump administration is that you cannot get behavior change from the Islamic Republic. It is either their way or it has to be pushed towards regime collapse.
So really, President Trump has no choice but to take kinetic action, as you said, potentially, as we saw used in Venezuela. Would you imagine it would be a similar sort of attack, very targeted?
It would have to be targeted. The main difference was, in the case of Venezuela, they still leveraged the people within the system after taking out Maduro. In the Islamic Republic context, even though there are numerous parallel institutions, it is really challenging to imagine a scenario where the president would have to work, well, let's say with the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's a FTO, designated terrorist organization. So that would be the main difference, but I guess ultimately leveraging the movement on the ground would be key. And that's a big if actually the administration would move forward with a kinetic option. There are non-kinetic options as well to support the protesters, such as providing them with internet, Starlink, or even supporting a strike fund or cyber attacks. But again, if we're talking kinetic, there are really two main options available, either strictly repression or military and repression.
The US doesn't have a great track record of messing around in the Middle East and therefore creating greater long-term stability. Do you suspect, Janatan, at this occasion, President Trump might get it right? That if regime change does happen, that he would have the right people to step into that void?
That has been a concern in the minds of U.S. policymakers given Iraq and Afghanistan, but there are a few factors that really differentiate Iran from the region. First of all, in the context of Iran, you're talking about a movement that is inherently anti-Islamist. In the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, the only force against the ruling entity, whether it was Saddam Hussein or whether it was the US-backed government, the only force was Islamist factions, whether Shia or Sunni, same thing in Afghanistan. In Iran, we're seeing the opposite. It's the Middle East's largest anti-Islamist movement. But more importantly, you're talking about a level of educated Iranians who are, I think women outnumber men in universities. You're talking about a population that is familiar with political campaigns. Even though elections are sham in the Islamic Republic, there's no doubt about that, and everything's pre-designed by the supreme leader. Nonetheless, there is a mechanism in place that has familiarized the population with how to launch a campaign, how to do a party. So the framework is really in place. You cannot really compare the Iranian population to Iraq and Afghanistan in the 90s and the 70s. So it is looking more optimistic. But more importantly, you have the Crown Prince that has been leading this movement, and he has great ties with America. He's realistically the only viable option that could get sanctions relief if there were to be regime collapse.
Am I right in thinking that he is in DC at the moment?
Correct.
He's in town now, and he's holding a conference, I think, tomorrow morning.
I believe so.
And what will he be here asking President Trump?
I think he's there to lay out one key thing, that there won't be a power vacuum. He needs to be in place in order to prevent any sort of chaos coming about. And the only likely scenarios that would happen, one case is theoretically separatist movements getting out of control. But again, he's been more of a sense of, he's created a sense of unity amongst Iranians. He's been a national figure for years now. Of course, he has a defection plan, ensuring that there would be correct experts in place to move this transition along. But I think he's been very clear that he wants to lead a transition, and he doesn't want to necessarily be a monarch. That's up to the Iranian people, depending on how the elections might turn out after the regime collapse and what form of governance they choose.
And it's no exaggeration, is it, to say that peace in the Middle East, an abatement of terrorism, Islamic terrorism all around the world, that won't happen with the regime in Iran in place. If there is any hope of peace in the Middle East and the implications of that for the rest of the world, particularly the West, we have a lot of illegal migrants come from that area of the world, etc., terrorist threat. The only way that President Trump can achieve that is to take out that regime and change it.
Without a doubt. So there are two pillars that you pointed out. One, of course, is instability caused by the migration throughout the Middle East. And you're talking about what? Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. And the Islamic Republic has played a critical role in all of these three wars. So again, when you see these refugees come out of Syria, it was the Islamic Republic bombing them. The Taliban in Afghanistan, supported by the Islamic regime. And of course, same with the Iraqis. Iran has a great influence across the Iraqi Shia militias. So without a doubt, yes. But more importantly, we're talking about not just that form of stability. We're talking about extremism. Iran has a great terror network across Europe. They surveil citizens. They conduct assassinations attempts. But you see their footprint beyond Europe as well. Of course, you see it in Venezuela. Hezbollah launders money, moves weapons around. Russia could not have sustained its war against Ukraine without Iranian drones and missiles. So it's something that would certainly go beyond the region. It's the only way that we can ensure stability throughout the Middle East and a safer globe.
Well, there might be reasons for optimism, but no doubt there are some mountains to climb before we get to that point. Janatan Sayeh from the Foundation for Defence of Democracy, thank you so much for joining us. More to